下一个报告是我们的Gareth 博士。Hi Gareth, are you there?
I certainly am. Thank you very much for the
Okay,
opportunity to do this.
yes, yes. Okay, sorry as your wait so long time. So I think it's your turn, and I will give you a brief introduction about you and to all the attendants. Okay,
Fantastic.
OK。Gareth 博士呢是毕业于英国的 Bristol 大学，获得的博士学位。也先后的话呢，也在美国、爱尔兰和英国，的20多所大学里面，进行过相应的科学研究，包括都柏林大学、南安普敦大学，等等。Gareth 博士现在还是泰勒·弗朗西斯杂志的叫历史生物学的主编。当然了，盖瑞斯博士除了科学研究之外，还积极的参与到一些科研写作的教育和培训当中。比如盖瑞斯博士的课程曾经被英国高等教育管理局 HEA 以及爱尔兰高等教育管理局 HEI 的认可，并且在Science、Nature 等知名学术期刊上发表过多篇论文。Gareth 博士于今年的4月全职加入了我们柳云编辑，也非常高兴和 Gareth 共事。目前的话是我们的柳云编辑的教育主管兼高级出版顾问。Gareth 今天的报告的题目是Perceptions of Impact: What makes a great academic paper? Okay, Gareth, you can start.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to do this presentation today. Thanks for the invitation. And it's my huge pleasure to follow Helen. She's a great inspiration to me. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Gareth is my name. And this presentation, The Perceptions of Impact, What Makes a Great Research Paper. And as Xiaolin, my colleague, just explained, I'm now working. It's my great pleasure also to be working with Edanz, building education and driving training and helping colleagues all over the world to be more effective writing and publishing your work in English. So I hope you can see the slides. Here's a little bit about me to get us going. I've worked around the world in a number of different universities. You can see here on the slide, and we are talking about impact. We're talking in this presentation about research impact, what that means. Now, I've published a number of papers over the course of my career, some of them in Nature, some of them in Science, good journals, you might think, but often what turns out to be the case with your publications, and this has certainly turned out to be the case with my publications, is that actually the papers that you write that get the most citations, that get used the most by other researchers, other colleagues around the world, are not actually your biggest journal publications. I published a number of review papers, you can see on the slide, and some book chapters about birds, about the evolution and diversity of birds that actually turned out to be my most highly cited, highly used papers. So that's the point of this presentation today. What is impact? What is an impactful, what is a great research paper? That's what we're going to talk about in our presentation today. And I would like to begin my talk by asking you to think about who the most important people are in the writing and publishing process. Of course, there's no point writing and publishing academic papers if nobody's going to read them. Readers, the users of academic work, are the most important people in the whole process. Of course, people who are going to read and people who are going to cite your work. So let's have a think about our readers as we get started with this presentation this afternoon. Your readers, your users, have no spare time. They want to read papers as fast as possible. They're going to get frustrated if they struggle with understanding your academic articles. And of course, most of the papers that we see as academics every day are not essential reading. They're not necessary 100% for us to read. So we have to think about our English, how we communicate with other researchers when we write. I can certainly help. We can certainly help with that. If you look at some of our Learning Lab, Liam Baje Learning Lab resources that we have at Edanz, we can help you with that kind of thing to keep your writing techniques simple and easy to follow. And don't forget that most of your readers, even though your paper is going to be written in English, potentially, most of your readers will not be native English speakers. So we encourage you to keep it simple, engage with readers in order to put together a more impactful academic paper. Where's most of the research being done these days? In China, in Asia. So most people are not native speakers, yet we have to write and we have to publish often our articles in English. And so that's the point of how we can help with training, with presentations like this. So in this talk today, we're going to talk about what editors think makes a great research paper, different to what authors, people like you, people like me, what do we think makes a great research paper? So that feeds into the question of what is impact in academic writing and in academic publishing. And of course, then we'll talk just a little bit about what this might mean for you, how you can select a journal, how you can message your next paper to get maximum impact from your work. So what editors think, what authors think, what impact is, and how we can take advantage of these issues in our own writing and publishing process to be as successful as possible. That's the point of all of this, to make sure that you get your papers published and that you make the biggest impact with your research as possible. So here's a few numbers to get us started with this. 2,030,000. 2 million, that's approximately the number of papers that get published every year in science, technology, engineering, and medicine. 30,000, that's around about the number of medical science papers that get published just in the course of a few months. So the point of this is to help us understand impact. We have to stand out. We have to do things in our writing, we have to do things in our publishing to make sure that editors think that our work is impactful, and of course to make sure that other authors, other researchers, other colleagues want to read our papers at the end of the day. So techniques for developing impact are actually very, 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 very important in our research careers. And I'd also like to say that our motivations, the reasons why we want to get papers published as authors, can change as well. Over the course of your career, over the course of my career, the reasons for getting work published have also changed. At the beginning of your career, master's students, PhD students, of course, want to get papers published to get their degree. An English SCI paper published might be a requirement for a PhD or a master's degree. As we develop as researchers, of course, we want to get our papers published to get promoted, to get tenure, to get that next grant application. Your motivations as a researcher, as an academic, are very different, very, very different from the motivations of editors and often the motivations of peer reviewers in terms of what makes a great paper, what makes an impactful paper that is going to be useful to other colleagues. So we went and we asked people about this particular question. We asked authors, researchers, and we asked editors, what do you think is important in an academic paper? And as you can see here from this very simple graph, editors think about readers, they think about downloads, they think about views of academic papers, they think about citations. Of course they do. They want to build the reputation for their journal. They want as many people as possible to read the papers that they publish in the National Science Review, in Nature, in Science. That's what's important to editors. They don't care so much about the impact that the research might make on society, on people outside of academia, whereas authors do. Authors care about reads, authors care about citations, but they also want to make sure, they want to ensure that their research makes a difference outside of the actual publication itself. Authors care that research has societal impact outside of the journal publication. So we'll talk about that also in a little bit in this presentation, but you can see that the motivations for authors publishing papers and the motivations for editors publishing papers can be quite different. So we'll talk a little bit now about what editors want, what journal editors want to see in what they think are great academic papers. What do editors want to see? Now, the word editor in English is a bit confusing. I know that because we use the word editor to refer to lots of different kinds of people in the academic publishing process. So you, the author, may not be aware that you might encounter several different kinds of editors over the course of the publishing process. Language editors, people like me, people like our colleagues at Edanz who might edit your language and help you to improve the English content in your articles, are different individuals from journal academic editors, the people making those decisions at the journals about what to do with academic content. So your language editors, your academic editors, and then the people in the gray suits, the senior people at the top of the tree who are managing the whole of the process. But we have to make sure that our papers are both well written, well structured, easy to understand in English, and also that they get us into the peer review process. So when you submit a paper to an academic journal, of course, the first thing that happens is that this process of academic triage takes place. This process, a bit like getting hit by a bus out on the street, you get rushed off to the hospital, the doctors triage you, they decide what's going to happen next with you at the hospital. Well, a journal editor does exactly the same thing at a journal. They look at submissions and they think, does it fit with the journal's scope? Does the article have a clear message? Is the article original? Is it important? Is it true? And most importantly of all, is this paper important and relevant to the readers of this journal? That's what editors want to see. That's what editors are considering in this first step of the process. Will they send your next paper out to peer review, or will they reject it without peer review? You've got to sell yourself. You've got to understand what editors want to see in academic papers in order to get through that initial triage step. Of course, high impact factor journals, National Science Review, Nature, Science, they want to maintain those rejection rates. They want to keep their impact factors up as high as possible. And that's the reason that 9 out of 10 papers that get sent to Nature, Science, National Science Review, they get rejected before peer review. So thinking about what editors perceive to be good academic articles before you make that initial submission can be very, 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 very important to your success as a writing and publishing academic. So what's your message? What is it that you want people to get out of reading your next paper? If an editor can't work out your single take-home message, they will reject your paper before sending it for peer review. They'll also reject your paper if you haven't convinced them of your study's importance. Editors think, if I'm interested, if this is an interesting study, then of course my readers are going to be interested as well. So number one thing that editors think makes a great paper, is it interesting for the readership of that particular journal? That is, as we've talked about, quite different from what we often perceive to be great papers as authors. As I illustrated at the beginning with my own publications, hey, I published in Nature. I thought that would be one of my most important papers, but no, actually, some of my other work, some of my book chapters, some of my review papers got many more citations over time. So let's have a little bit of a think about what authors want with those academic papers. Of course, authors tend to think about three things when they look for journals, when they write academic papers. They want speed, they want a decent impact factor, and they want their papers to have high reach and to be read by as many people as possible, of course. And that's where the motivations for publishing overlap with those of editors. We want our papers to come out quick. We want our papers to be in the best journals possible, and we want our papers to be read by as many people as possible. So we experience much more of a synergy between our research and the publication process than an editor might do. We tend to think as authors about impact factor, reputation, reach within the field, and access. Is the journal open or not? And I know that in different academic fields, there are many, many examples of journals that have great reputations within a particular research area, but that may not have such a decent impact factor, of course. So this is a balance in your career between doing what's best for you and what's best for your career. And there might be trade-offs in this process when it comes to journal selection, as we'll talk about in a minute. Accessibility, impact factor, and of course, you should not be submitting papers to journals that do not use peer review. That's the fundamental benchmark. That's the fundamental way in which we assess, we measure the quality of academic content. So don't use journals that don't use peer review. Have a look at the editorial board, have a look at who's on the board, and think about impact factor, reach, reputation, and open access and accessibility. So editors' perceptions of what makes a great paper, authors' perceptions of what makes a great paper, it all boils down, it all comes down to impact. And we'll talk a little bit now about what impact is, what impact means for us as researchers writing and publishing our work. Now, if you ask somebody, what's impact? Hey, Gareth, what is impact? They will talk about impact factor. And we'll come back and we'll discuss in more detail in a moment some of the issues around that. But of course, a journal's impact factor is, of course, important. We all accept that, like it or not. This is one of the ways that we get assessed as academics. So if you're interested, here's a summary of how journal impact factors get calculated. You should be looking at your impact factor when you're selecting journals. But as we've just discussed, that's just part of the story of impact, the decentness, the height of that impact factor. We count papers, impact factors. We care about our R indexes, our H indexes, our institutions, our universities, our medical schools, our hospitals, our governments. They look at the impact of our papers, circulation, but this is changing and the field is moving away. As you know, in China, the government's new policies on assessing researchers, we are looking now for more than just which journal did you publish that paper in. Often, as we've looked at already in the case of my own work, research circulation, Nature science papers, doesn't necessarily translate directly into impact, into how many people read the paper, how many people use the paper, what difference does the research make? That's the key issue here. How many researchers are actually going to cite your papers, even though they've been published in those big international journals? And so this is where we're at with the whole issue of impact as researchers. I know the UK government, the Australian government, the European Union, the United States, countries like China, of course, as well, are looking now at ways to assess academic output, academics, researchers, in other ways than just impact factor. Which journal did you publish your work in? And this diagram on the far side of this slide summarizes the issue quite nicely, because what we're looking at actually is academic impact the impact of the journal publications, as well as what difference our research is making to ordinary people. What socioeconomic difference is your research making? And being able to make a statement, being able to describe to other people, to your university, to your colleagues, to your government even, the socioeconomic as well as academic impact of your research is becoming more and more and more important. So I do encourage everybody listening to this to have a think about that, and also to talk about your research. One of the best ways to make an impact, one of the best ways to ensure that your papers are great, is of course to tell people about your research, not just your publications once they appear in those journals. Talk about your research as a journey, talk about what you're doing, know your social media channels, talk about what you're up to, so that when those papers, when those research outputs appear, people are aware of you as a researcher, they're aware of your impact, and they're aware of what you're doing. What is the attention that your research is gaining? What's the interest that people are showing in your research? What desires do they have to understand more about your research? And then finally, the portion of impact that most of us tend to care about. And if you're anything like me, this is all you ever did. All I ever did when I was a researcher, when publishing papers, was to look at the citations. And there is so much more that you can do than that as a researcher. So I encourage you then to think about your next research project as not just that final publication, which of course is going to be great. Of course, it's going to get published in a leading international journal. It's going to make a big impact, but what are you doing with your research along the whole trajectory, along the whole lifespan of the project? What inputs, what activities, what outputs, what outcomes, and what impacts are you having as a researcher on the lives and well-being, potentially the socioeconomic activities of people outside of your research group? Right, so finally then, as academics, we are coming to the issue of journal selection. We're interested in maximizing our outputs, maximizing our inputs. How are we going to do this when we go ahead and pick a journal for our research outputs? One of the most important choices that we make as researchers when we are doing a piece of research, we're thinking, where am I going to publish that output at the end of the day? So in summary, we have two different kinds of journals, broadly speaking, that are around, that are out there in academic publishing. The trad journals, the traditional ones, we've all published in those. They're free to publish in, but not everybody will be able to access the content after the paper comes out. It might be behind a paywall. It might be publisher content that you have to have a subscription to access. Or on the other side of the coin, as Helen talked about in her presentation, open access journals, modern open access journals, those gold open access journals. The content is freely available to everybody, but you have to pay an article processing charge often for that content to appear online. Of course, you can transform a traditional journal to an open access journal. In most cases, those are green open access journals. You can do that by paying a fee to a journal. So that's the big difference, of course, between the different kinds of journals that we might have the chance to pick from as researchers, keeping in mind, of course, that we must be choosing peer-reviewed journals as a fundamental difference, a fundamental thing about those papers. Here's the big difference then between gold and green open access journals. If you're interested in understanding more about journal selection, more about open access, of course, we can provide additional training for you, perhaps for your institution. From Edanz, get in touch, please, with our colleagues there in Beijing. We can provide additional training, additional webinars, additional online courses. If you have a look at our Learning Lab content, you'll see a lot of that up there already to help people around the world, to help researchers be as effective as possible writing and publishing their research. I've got my pirate code for journal selection: 3 rules. Aim high, Talk to editors before you make those submissions. Write those pre-submission inquiries. Send off those emails to editors and ask them, hey, would you be interested in seeing this paper in your journal potentially as something you'd like to peer review? Pre-submission inquiries are very important. We can give you templates for those kinds of emails, of course, as well. If you ask, we'll send you those after the presentation. So aiming high, talking to editors, and learning to sell and manage that journal submission, as we talked about already in this presentation. And let me let you in on a little secret. Most successful academics writing and publishing their work, they don't do that. They don't start writing until they've already got a target journal in mind. Very important step to go through. You finish a piece of research, you will then make that assessment. Which journal am I going to write this up for? Which journal am I going to be able to publish this piece of research in? That's an initial step that you'd go through before you start the writing process, because of course, every journal is different. You might be writing different kinds of articles for different journals, and you can talk to colleagues. You can make those pre-submission inquiries at the beginning of the process. So let me finish up by giving you a few tips for effective writing and effective journal publishing. The first of which is make sure you have a clear, effective message with your academic papers. I always use the technique of thinking about my grandmother, shown here on this slide. What will I say to her about my next academic paper? How will I explain the message of my next piece of research in a way that's clear and easy to understand? That's the secret to successful journal publishing, getting your work into those big international journals, attracting the attention of editors, convincing them that your work is important, that your work is interesting enough for their readers. It's got to be broad, it's got to be multidisciplinary, it's got to have a clear message. So we teach people to prepare to write. Don't just sit down at your computer and start to hammer away. Make sure you think before you begin the writing process about your message, about your audience, the target journal, and about the structure of the writing. Of course, we can help with all of these issues, but making sure that you feel that your work is new and interesting, it relates to a hot topic, it's new and challenging, it provides a solution potentially to a difficult problem. Journal publishing is about storytelling, having that effective message, assembling that message into 1 or 2 sentences before you begin that writing process. Here's my favorite fantasy fiction author, English guy called Terry Pratchett. He said, and this is a very important message for academic writers all over the world, people like to be told what they think they already know. You want people to get to the end of your next paper and think, I agree, I expected that, I feel that that's the right result. Editors, peer reviewers, and your colleagues reading your articles from around the world want to hear in your papers what they feel they already know. They want to get to the end of the reading experience and they want to agree with you. So that's also a very important thing for me to finish my presentation with this afternoon. My name's Gareth Dyke, and this has been an Edanz China office presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to my colleague Xiaolin Li for the opportunity to give this talk this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gareth, for your great presentation. And in the presentation, you talk about the importance of the how to look at the importance of the perspective of the impact from different perspective and from editors, from researchers and something like that. So thank you very much. So now it is a Q&A sections. Okay, we got some questions for you, Gareth. The first one I think is from some editors. Okay. As most time research are driven by their curiosity. They care about their experiments and report their findings by publishing academic papers from the perspective of authors, how to find the I think the balance between the research interest and the publication, how to suppose.
Yeah, that's a great question. How to balance your own interest as a researcher with the need to get the work published, and the need to get the work published in a decent journal. And I think that the best technique for doing this as a researcher is to look at where other colleagues, other researchers that you respect from around the world who are publishing in your own field, where they're publishing their research, which journals they're using for their own research, because of course you want your reputation within your own particular research area to be enhanced. You want to become an international expert or viewed as an international expert in your own research area. So I do feel that your own interest in the research can be brought across in the way that you write the papers and also in the journals that you choose to publish your research in. Of course, we want people to be able to read, to have access to our research. So thanks for the question. I hope that my answer was useful. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for the great question.
I think maybe continued about this question. So I think actually for the a publication we can call publication chain. It's from the research areas and findings, and finally its publications. I think the most important thing is that we should have high level findings, right? So based on this, and then it's much possible, and we can have the high level publications and high level impact findings or impact publications, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is something that we help people with, like at Edanz, like not just the editing and the journal selection stages of this research cycle, but also helping colleagues to identify effective research questions. That's a big step for lots of researchers around the world. Like I've got lots of ideas and I've got lots of things that I want to work on, but which of those ideas will be the ideas that will make the most impact? Which of those research questions are the questions that will translate into the most impactful publications? So absolutely, like coming up with good ideas doesn't just mean that they're interesting to you. It also has to mean that they're interesting, in the context of your own research area and in the context of your discipline. So yeah, we are happy to help colleagues with all stages of the research cycle. Absolutely.
Okay. And here another question. So as Dr. Gareth, so as an in-house editor for the new launched journal, so how could I attract, I think, enough high quality submissions to uh, to 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 uh, to build up my journal? I think it is very common issues
Yeah,
for all the
absolutely.
newly
Yeah.
launched journal, right?
Yes. And we have, I have been involved in the launch of several journals. Most recently, a journal that is published jointly between China and the Netherlands. And everybody faces the same issues because you don't have an impact factor, you don't have a reputation, and you need to attract authors to your paper, so to your journal. So I mean, the one of the ways to do this is to make sure you have a good international editorial board of renowned specialists from your particular field. So not just 5 or 6 people from your own university or from your own city, but experts that you've invited to join the editorial board. So authors, prospective authors, will assess the reputation of your journal by looking at the editorial board. And I think also you can invite review papers, you can get in touch with conference organizers to see, would it be possible to publish conference proceedings in your journal? All of these ways to increase the number of papers that you get submitted. I know it's very, very hard at the early stages of journal launch. We can talk about this in more detail if you're interested in that. We can certainly help you and advise you on how you might do that. But I know it's very difficult, but possible, absolutely possible to build that journal reputation. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I think also very important is that we should the general position and the subject area of the general position is very, very important. For some very, how to say, some kind of very so many generals in some specific area, maybe it's not a good idea to launch the general
Yet
in that
another one,
area, right? Yeah,
right.
especially for some kind of multidiscipline and for the emergency subject area, maybe it's a very good idea to have the new general in that subject area, and
Right.
it's easily, yeah, and it easily to solicit enough high quality paper, high quality submissions.
Right. And have a look at preprint servers. Have a look at some of the preprint servers that are out there in your own subject area. I know the Chinese Academy of Sciences, for example, has a series of preprint servers. You can have a look at what articles are out there in order to target authors with your journal and to go to authors directly and say, hey, I've seen your your preprint on this preprint server. This would be very interesting for our journal. Would you be interested in making a full submission? Something like that is also a strategy you can have a think about, I think.
Okay, and here's another question. I think it's hey, Dr. Gareth, I'm interested in becoming an editor. So, can you share any suggestions on how to be a professional panel editor?
Yeah, I mean that's a question for Helen. I think that's I mean there's a number of very successful, very active societies within China that you can get in touch with and learn from the content that they provide and the experiences and the training courses that they would offer. But I mean, the only way to learn these kinds of things is to get involved with journals and reach out to journals and offer your services. And if you're an academic working in a particular area, you're doing your degree in a particular area, your PhD, I would get in touch with journals and offer to get involved with these kinds of tasks. And of course talk, as I mentioned, with people like Helen who can help you connect with the professional societies in China that support people who work in editing.
Okay, so guys, we know you're the editor-in-chief of Tyler Francis Journal. So can you talk a little bit about how you become the editor-in-chief of the journal?
It was a job that was advertised many years ago when I was working in Dublin in Ireland. It explains my strange English accent a little bit, but yeah, like I had the interest in doing more work with professional journals within my subject area. So when that opportunity arose, like almost 20 years ago now, I got in touch with the journal, and I was selected to take on that role. And so what we've done is we've built an editorial board. It's been a very interesting experience for me because when I started working with historical biology, the journal had not published any papers for almost 3 years. It had been around for a long time, this journal, since the 1970s, but they'd fallen into a real kind of slump of not publishing many articles. So we had to attract authors, we had to re-promote the journal, we had to build back up the content, and that took a lot of work. And because authors really care about reputation and about speed of publication and about impact factor. So if you don't have any of those things, no reputation, you don't know how long it's going to take to fill the next issue and publish the next set of content, and you don't have an impact factor, it's really hard to attract authors to make submissions. So we did it actually with review papers, and we did it with monographs. We offered people a platform where they could publish those longer papers that maybe they couldn't get published in other journals because they were just too long. We offered that opportunity in that journal, in historical biology, at the start. So publishing gradually, the journal reputation was improved, and now we have a decent impact factor, and we have enough content to fill printed issues for almost 2.5 years now. So the problem has become how to publish everything that we have gotten submitted to the journal. But yeah, it was a lot of work, and I fully appreciate like how difficult that is at the start of the process, especially if you don't have a big publishing company, a big name behind you. So it was easier for us because Taylor and Francis were, the publishing house. So people know that publishing house, they trusted the journal a little bit more. So that's a consideration as well. I think it's important, that reputation of the publisher also. But yeah, great. Lots of work.
Okay, cool. Okay, it's very important for one journal should have one good editor-in-chief like you, and also has a very good should partner with one uh high
Publisher, yeah.
one high level publisher, right?
Right, because people trust the reputation of the editorial board. They look at
Mm,
journals and they want to see like who's on that editorial board. And that's
mm,
one thing to look at when selecting journals, by the way, because predatory publishers,
mm,
not so reputable publishers, they don't
mm,
care about those kinds of things. They just make up the editorial board, or they just pretend they have an impact factor. They just want to take your money for publishing. So have a look at the editorial board. If it's a new
mm,
journal, nothing to stop you from sending a few emails to some editorial board members just to check that they really are editorial
mm,
board members before you make your submission. So it's a big step choosing a journal. I appreciate that.
mm,
Absolutely. Really
mm.
important for authors.
I think maybe it's another issues happened for you, and for your journal, I think you already can got enough submissions, and for now it's your choice, and you want to improve the reject rate or
Yeah.
want to publish everything you got, right? So how you
Right.
balance?
Yeah, I mean, as journals grow their reputations, they want to enhance their impact factor. So, and one of the ways that impact factor is calculated, of course, is taking into account rejection rate. So we do have to keep that rejection rate up as high as possible. And that, by the way, is the reason that lots of journals will give you what's called a soft rejection for your papers. They'll give you a rejection, but they'll say, hey, we'd welcome, a resubmission if you can correct all of the issues that the reviewers have highlighted. We would welcome a resubmission, and they get the paper back with a different manuscript number, and they get like twice as many submissions, and they get one rejection. So that's called a soft rejection. Journals use that as a technique to enhance their impact factor. So yeah, we try to do that. We try to look at papers. We try to be critical. We try to evaluate the reviewers' comments, but we don't reject unless we really feel that there's no chance for the paper. So that doesn't happen much actually in our journal. I'm very kind-hearted.
OK OK, Thank you, Gareth. And 大家还有问题吗？可以直接的，如果说我们在腾讯视频的话，可以直接在线交流。好，那没有问题的话，那我们今天的直播就到此结束。再次感谢国家科学评论的大力的支持，感谢张远红老师，感谢 Gareth，谢谢大家，我们今天的直播就到此结束。